When the truck door opened, the smell of damp cardboard gave way to the cold air of the British dawn. My knees gave out as I stepped onto the damp floor of that warehouse. It was cracked concrete, full of puddles, but to me, it felt like the red carpet of victory. I had made it. We had made it. My legs trembled, my feet throbbed inside worn-out shoes. My 5 children were pale, curled up, their clothes soaked with sweat, and their eyes bloodshot. Manjeet climbed down with difficulty, gripping my hand tightly, as if she still couldn't believe we were alive. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. That silence was the loudest scream of our lives. You might think I'm exaggerating, but stepping on that ground was more powerful than the birth of my first child, because he was born in a place where hope was already being suffocated. And there, for the first time, I felt the world might still have something to offer beyond pain. I didn't know where we would sleep. I didn't know if they would hunt us down like animals. But what I did know was that we had walked through hell to be there. And it wasn't going to be a dirty look, a word of contempt, or a law designed to push us out that would stop me. The future of England? It's my family walking strong on the very ground they said we'd never reach. My name is Amarjit Singh. I'm 52 years old and I was born in Ludhiana, in the state of Punjab, northern India. I grew up surrounded by the smell of spices, blaring horns, heat burning the skin, and way too many people in too little space. Life there was loud, hot, and hard, but there was a certain pride in the struggle. We were raised to believe that work was a blessing, and that silence was for people with nothing to do. I was a mechanic. I worked from a young age, helping my father in his shop. My hands were always covered in grease, and my eyes were always dreaming of something no one around me could see. Stability, not luxury, not wealth, just stability. A place where my children could study without strikes, without lines, without needing to bribe someone to get seen at the hospital. I had 5 children with my wife, Manjeet. When our eldest was born, I made a promise to myself. He wouldn't go through what I did. He wouldn't miss school because of power cuts, or lose a job because someone more connected skipped the line. But in India, a promise means nothing without courage. And I knew that if I stayed, all I could offer was more of the same. That's when I started looking outward. First Dubai, then Canada. But something kept pulling me toward England. Maybe it was the broken English I'd picked up as a kid. Maybe it was the fact that so many from our community had already set foot there. Maybe it was a burning desire to prove that those who come from dust can walk their asphalt with our heads held high. And I won't lie, I wanted to be where the world's decisions are made, just to remind them that we exist. Do you think coming here with 5 kids and a wife was crazy? Maybe it was. But to me, staying still and waiting for a miracle would have been even crazier. And yeah, they called me reckless, insane, a traitor to my country. But none of those people were there when my son needed expensive medicine, or when my daughter cried because we couldn't afford a school uniform. We left with whatever we could carry, a few coins, expired documents, and a half-baked plan. But what I really brought with me was stubbornness. That typical Punjabi stubbornness, the kind that kicks the door open even knowing it might slam right back in your face. Today, when people ask me why I did it, why I dragged my kids down this cursed road full of uncertainty, I don't answer. I show them. I show them the house we live in, the business we built, the friends we've made, and the neighborhood that slowly became an extension of our family. They didn't give us space, we took it. Before I ever set foot in England, before airports, lines, and promises, there was a dirt road in Ludhiana where my children ran barefoot in the late afternoon. It was a simple life, the kind that might even look beautiful from the outside, but only from the outside, because behind those children's smiles were overdue bills, untreated illness, and the constant fear that the police might knock on our door for some made-up reason. The workshop I inherited from my father was a concrete box with a broken fan and diesel fumes soaked into the walls. The heat was unbearable. I passed out twice from dehydration, but no one had time for drama. Complainers lost customers, and if you lost customers, your kids didn't eat. Manjeet, my wife, cooked lunchboxes to sell at the local market. She'd wake up at 4 in the morning, light the wood stove, cook rice, dal, and spicy vegetables wrapped in a scarf that always smelled of smoke. The pressure cooker was the alarm clock in our house. And still, most days the profit was just enough to buy more ingredients and do it all over again. My kids' school looked more like a warehouse for people. Some days, they had to share a notebook between two. Unmotivated teachers, broken desks, windows without glass. They came home sweaty, shirts stuck to their backs, and still they showed me their homework with pride. I pretended everything was fine, told them it was temporary, that their future would be different. And I said it looking in the mirror too, like a mantra, just so I wouldn't lose my mind. The worst part wasn't poverty. It was the feeling of being trapped. Because in India, if you're born without a strong last name, without land, without a political godfather, it feels like your fate is already written. I kept trying to believe effort was enough. But after years pushing the same cart, fixing the same engine, running the same cycle, I finally understood. It wasn't about effort. It was about where the game starts. And on my board, I was born cornered. When my third child got sick and the hospital refused treatment because I didn't have the fee they asked for under the table, something in my head exploded. I walked out of there with my child in my arms and one certainty: I wouldn't bury anyone in that soil. Enough. My family was not going to become a failure statistic. If someone had to be broken in this story, it would be me, not them. I started saving every coin. I sold the workshop. I sold Manjeet's jewelry. I sold the old bicycle I'd bought with my first paycheck. I sold my pride. And with that money, I started looking for roots. Most were dirty, dangerous, and uncertain. But any uncertainty was better than the certainty of misery. The last week before we left, I took my children to the temple. We prayed together. My boys looked at me like I was a hero. But inside, I was shaking like a cornered rat. A rat filled with rage. Rage at the system. Rage at the indifference. Rage at being treated like we didn't matter. And that rage, when channeled, became strength. I remember our last night. We all sat on the floor of our home, ate rice and vegetables, and I drank a cup of warm milk, just like my father used to do. It was a ritual. Only this time, it was goodbye. The fan made an annoying noise, but I knew I'd miss even that, because that was my land, my chaos, my root. But sometimes, even a root rots if you don't change the soil. The next morning we left. There were no goodbyes at the station. No hug from my mother, no handshake from a friend. We left like people on the run, light backpacks and heavy hearts, but with our heads held high, because even without knowing what lay ahead, I knew we couldn't afford to stay behind any longer. The India I left behind wasn't just a country. It was a part of me. It was the boy who believed honesty could fix everything. The mechanic who thought good work would be enough. The father who thought love alone could save his children. But the world out there is brutal. And to face it, I needed more. I needed opportunity. Not just hope. I don't regret leaving my home. But I won't pretend it was easy. Even now, sometimes I dream of that noisy street, of the smell of Manjeet's cooking, of my father's hands showing me how to tighten the bolt just right. But then, I wake up to the sound of the British alarm clock, and I remember, this pain is part of the price I paid to give my children what was denied to me my entire life. They say immigrants come to take, but before I ever took anything, I had to give up everything. The journey began before I ever left India. It started the moment I decided to become a problem for the system. The moment I realized that the world pushing me down would call me an invader if I ever dared to rise. And still, I rose. Because a man with 5 kids and nothing to lose doesn't negotiate with fear. We left Ludhiana on a train that shook so much it felt like it wanted to throw us off at every turn. The children were piled onto the wooden bench, backpacks clutched tightly to their chests. Manjeet and I exchanged glances without saying a word. The silence between us said everything. It was now or never. Our plan was to reach Delhi, catch a flight with a stopover in the Middle East, and then continue overland to an alternate entry point. Legal? It wasn't. Safe? Not even close. But they said it could work. And when you're at rock bottom, anything that looks like a ladder becomes an option. In Delhi, the heat was suffocating, and the city's stench turned my stomach. We slept for 2 days in a room with mattresses thrown on the floor, sharing space with other migrants whose eyes carried the same heavy past. No one spoke much. The shame was collective. Everyone in that room knew they were just a number running from a bigger number. Poverty. We boarded a flight to Dubai with documents that only God knows how they passed inspection. That's when I began to understand that the world has different rules for those born on the wrong side of the planet. We don't travel. We hide. Every airport employee was a threat. Every curious look made me sweat. And even then, we smiled. Because fear couldn't show. In Dubai, the contact we were promised never showed up. We spent 4 days sleeping in a deserted area near an abandoned warehouse. The kids cried from hunger. Manjeet developed a fever. That was the moment I almost gave up. Almost. But then I saw my eldest son share his last biscuit with the youngest. And something inside me lit up. If he could be strong, so could I. When the new contact finally came, they put us in the back of a pickup truck covered with a black tarp. We drove for miles without knowing where we were going. One of my sons got sick and vomited on himself. I wiped him clean with my shirt sleeve. That was when I stopped caring about right or wrong. There was only one rule: keep my family alive. We were dropped near the Turkish border. We crossed on foot. 3 days walking through dry, rocky terrain that tore at the soles of our shoes. The children began to lose spirit. Manjeet nearly fainted on the second day. I had to carry our youngest daughter on my shoulders while encouraging the others with lies like, "We're almost there." It wasn't true. I had no idea where we were. When we crossed the first barrier, I understood what it meant to be illegal. It's not just the fear of being arrested. It's the constant weight of not officially existing. You live in the shadows, like an animal. In Greece, we were hidden under plastic tarps that reeked of urine and mold. But at least there was dry bread and water. That was already a luxury. From there, we managed to get inside a transport truck headed to France. The trip was hell. Locked in the dark, losing track of time, the children crying quietly so we wouldn't be discovered. One moment is burned into me forever. When my middle son whispered, "Daddy, I'm scared," and I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had no voice. Fear had swallowed me too. In France, the plan was to cross into the UK, hidden inside one of the trucks going through the Channel Tunnel. We were taken to Calais, the place they call the jungle. That's exactly what it was, a jungle of invisible people. There's no humanity there, only survival. Each day in that camp felt like a month. Mud, fights over food, constant fear of police raids. I've never felt lonelier than I did in that crowded place. We tried to cross 3 times. The first time, we were discovered and ran like animals. The second time, we missed the schedule. The third time, it worked. We got into a cargo compartment behind cardboard boxes. Our breathing was heavy. The sound of the engine felt like a death sentence. If they found us, everything would start over. Or worse, but they didn't find us. After hours that felt like forever, the truck stopped. And when the doors opened, it was England. Not London yet, but it was British soil. I took a deep breath. I looked at my kids, dirty, skinny, but alive. I looked at Manjeet. She was crying in silence. And in that moment, I felt the impossible had been broken. I had done what many called madness. That first morning on British soil, we wandered for hours until we found a support center. It was an old building, musty and filled with the smell of old paper. But they gave us a thin mattress and a plate of warm food. I ate slowly, chewing each bite like it was gold. It was the first time in months my head hit a pillow without fear. My kids fell asleep right there, rice still on their plates. Even with my feet on British soil, my body couldn't believe it. With every step, I looked around, expecting someone to appear and send us back. Freedom had a bitter taste at first. I didn't know if I could trust it, if it was real, or just another temporary illusion. But it was real. For the first time, fear didn't control me. Little by little, we started to find our footing. First, a more stable shelter, then temporary social support. I felt no shame, because before they point fingers at those who receive, they should remember what we had to leave behind to even be here. They call us illegals, but people who survive like this aren't asking for permission. We're demanding dignity, and if that bothers you, maybe you've forgotten what it means to fight for a piece of land with a name and an address. Coming to England wasn't the end. It was the beginning of another battle. But for the first time, it was a battle where I actually had a chance. England was cold in a way that cut to the bone. And it wasn't just the weather. It was the people, the stares, the forced silence on the buses. Here, no one bumps into you and says sorry. Here, they bump into you and pretend you're not there. At first, that kind of thing hurt more than any financial struggle, because I had known hunger, but being treated like I was invisible, that was new. We were placed in a housing block on the outskirts of Birmingham, in a building full of dirty staircases and walls that peeled more with every rainfall. But there were others like me there. Nigerians, Syrians, Bangladeshis. Each floor spoke a different language. Each apartment hid a story that looked a lot like mine. England stacked us there as if to say, stay together and stay away from everyone else. And we did. But we didn't stay silent. My English was weak, just the basics. But it was enough to know when someone called me a leech or a burden on the state. It was enough to read signs warning that any suspicious behavior could lead to deportation. It was enough to see that behind British politeness, there was thinly veiled contempt. And still, I walked into the grocery store with my head held high. I refused to look down. Manjeet found work as a kitchen assistant in an Indian restaurant. She earned little, worked hard, but at least she was back around the smell of the pots she loved. I found odd jobs in construction, heavy labor, the kind of work locals refused to do. I hauled bricks, cleaned rubble, carried bags of cement with my back aching, but my pride intact. I never stole. I never begged. And still, they called me an invader. My children faced a different kind of war. At school, they were called the wrong names, ignored by teachers, always placed in the back row. One day, my oldest came home with his uniform torn. He didn't say what happened, just said, "I have to tough it out." That crushed me, because his pain wasn't just physical. It was the kind that buries itself deep and grows from the inside. Even so, I never told them to hide who they were. Quite the opposite. I told them to show it, and they did. In just 3 years, 2 of them were speaking English better than I ever could. One won a math medal, another joined a theater group. My youngest daughter learned to sing British songs in perfect tune with her classmates. They didn't ask for permission to belong here. They just became. Over time, I got to know more families in the community. We built bonds. We organized street parties on holidays, community dinners, open prayers at the Gurdwara. Some Brits frowned, but others started coming closer. One neighbor helped me apply for my first business license. That's how I started my little Indian food stall at the local market. I began small, selling samosas and chai. Now I have 3 permanent stalls. I employ 5 people. And even with all this, some still say, England is lost because of people like us. Funny. Lost for who? Because when it rains and the pipe bursts, it's the Indian who fixes it. When there's no one to clean the hospitals, it's the African who steps in. When the night bus has no English driver, it's the Pakistani behind the wheel. If I'm an invader, why do they rely on me to keep the city running? I never came here to take anything from anyone. I just wanted space. I just wanted a chance. I just wanted what every human being is said to deserve. But not everyone gets dignity. And I didn't come here to beg for it. I came to build it with my own hands. Over time, we stopped being the exception. More families came. Cousins, nephews, friends of friends, people from the temple. Each one with a suitcase in hand and a name no one could pronounce. But the same goal, to take root. And that's how the neighborhood started to change. Where once you only heard clipped English and closed doors, now you smell curry on the sidewalks, see kids in turbans running through the park, and smiles that recognize each other from a distance. The butcher shop on the corner is now halal. The clothing store has mannequins in Punjabi outfits in the window. The busiest restaurant on the block belongs to my cousin, who arrived a year after me. The English neighbors slowly disappeared. Some sold their houses. Others just couldn't handle the change. But we could. And more than that, we stayed. We occupied. One by one, the empty houses were bought by our people. Today, this neighborhood has more sings and cons than anyone else. And if that bothers someone, that's not my problem. We didn't invade anything. We built it. Brick by brick. Shop by shop. Family by family. We don't need to be accepted to exist. We exist anyway. We grow like roots through cracks in concrete. No one wants them, no one expects them, but by the time they're noticed, they've taken hold. Today, when I walk through these streets, every familiar face is part of my story. This whole neighborhood is my family, literally. And anyone who thought we would disappear lost the game. Sometimes I stand at my window and look out over the neighborhood. The street that used to be gray now has colorful flags hanging from balconies, the smell of spices in the air, and kids named Harpreet, Amandeep, and Jashan playing until the sun goes down. I look at all of it and think it was worth it. Every pain, every humiliation, every step through the mud, every sleepless night, it was worth it. Today my neighbor is my cousin. The little shop on the corner belongs to my sister-in-law. The woman who watches the kids next door came in the same truck I did. And the school where my grandchildren study has a vegetarian menu and celebrates Diwali with more excitement than Christmas. This isn't adaptation anymore. This is presence. This is us shaping the place, not being shaped by it. People drive by and look confused by the Hindi signs, the temples, the clothes, the aromas. But that's just the beginning. Because the next generation already speaks English without an accent, studies in their universities, and will be in their offices, their town halls, their hospitals. The neighborhood is just the foundation. The city is next. We're not trying to be accepted. We're becoming unavoidable. If someone had told me 20 years ago that I'd be here, in this neighborhood, surrounded by a community that carries my blood, my culture, my accent, I would have laughed. But today, it's real. And you know what's funny? They still call us the problem, the threat, as if their fear was our fault. But if fear means seeing a whole Indian neighborhood thrive, then let them be afraid. Because we're not leaving, we're growing. And every child of ours born here is another root planted deep in this land they swore would never be ours. England might try to deny it, but its future already looks like us. Now tell me in the comments, am I part of the problem or a glimpse of what's coming?